Kansas Territory, 1875. The plains stretched endlessly under the vast blue sky, tall grasses swaying like an ocean beneath the summer breeze. It was a place of unforgiving beauty, where only the strongest survived and where loneliness was as common as the prairie wind. At least, that was what Levi Jorgensen had come to believe. Levi sat tall in his saddle, his 25-year-old frame lean but strong from years of hard ranch work. The brim of his Stetson cast shadows across his clean-shaven face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the intensity of his deep blue eyes. Those eyes had seen enough harshness to last several lifetimes. His hands, calloused from rope and reins, held the leather with practiced ease as he guided his chestnut gelding across the rolling hills toward Willow Creek. The frontier is no place for attachments, Levi reminded himself, a mantra worn smooth through repetition. You get close to someone out here, you just give the land another way to break you. 2 years earlier, he'd watched helplessly as fire consumed his family's homestead, taking his parents with it. Since then, he'd drifted between ranches, taking work where he could find it, keeping his distance from anyone who might try to breach the walls he'd built around his heart. All he wanted now was enough money to buy his own modest spread, a place where he could be alone with his horses and cattle, answerable to no one. What he needed, though he'd never admit it, was something to fill the hollow ache that had taken residence in his chest since that terrible night. But need was dangerous in the West. Need could kill a man faster than a gunslinger's bullet. The town of Willow Creek appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a main street, promising brief respite from his journey to the McAllister Ranch where he'd been hired to help with the season's cattle drive. He'd stop for supplies, maybe a meal that wasn't cooked over a campfire, and then be on his way before anyone could start asking questions about where he came from or where he was headed. As he rode down the main street, the usual sounds of a frontier town greeted him: the blacksmith's hammer, the creak of wagon wheels, the murmur of conversations from the boardwalk. Levi paid them little mind, focused on his errand until a commotion outside the general store caught his attention. A group of young men, likely ranch hands on a day off, had formed a half-circle around someone Levi couldn't see. Their laughter held the sharp edge of cruelty that made the muscles in his jaw tighten. "Too heavy for dancing, that's for sure," one of them jeered. "Ain't no horse that wouldn't buckle under that load," another added, triggering a fresh round of laughter. Levi should have ridden past. It wasn't his business, and getting involved only invited trouble. But something in the silence that followed, a silence that spoke of dignified hurt, made him rein his horse to a stop. When the men shifted, he caught sight of her. She stood with her chin held high, though her eyes betrayed her pain. She couldn't have been more than 22, her face a perfect oval framed by rich brown hair the color of polished walnut, falling in waves past her shoulders. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her fuller figure, the fabric straining slightly at the seams from what looked like home alteration. The largest of the men stepped closer to her. "What do you say, Miss Kathryn?" "Gonna save me a dance at the social, if the floor can handle it, that is." Something in Levi's chest tightened. The woman, Kathryn, clutched her paper-wrapped packages closer, her knuckles white but her voice steady. "I believe I need to return home now, gentlemen." When she tried to step around them, one blocked her path. "Oh, don't be like that, we're just having some fun." Without conscious decision, Levi dismounted. His boots hit the dirt with a thud that drew their attention. He was not a large man, but there was a quiet strength in his stance, a steadiness born of surviving the elements and worse. "The lady wants to leave," he said simply. The largest of them turned, sizing Levi up with narrowed eyes. "This ain't your concern, stranger." "I'm making it my concern." Levi kept his voice level, though his right hand hovered near his hip where his Colt rested in its holster. He wasn't looking for a fight, but these men needed to understand he wouldn't back down. The tension stretched between them until the ringleader spat into the dirt. "Ain't worth the trouble." "Come on, boys." As they sauntered away, Levi turned his attention to the young woman. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a striking shade of amber, like whiskey held up to sunlight. Something stirred in him, an unfamiliar flutter that he quickly suppressed. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. "I am, thank you." Her voice was warm and musical, though tinged with embarrassment. "You didn't need to intervene. I'm quite used to their foolishness." "No one should have to get used to that kind of treatment." The words came unbidden, with more feeling than he'd intended. She studied him for a moment, then offered a small smile. Kathryn Vandermeer, my father owns the apothecary at the end of the street. Levi Jorgensen, just passing through on my way to the McAllister spread. He nodded toward his horse, realizing he was lingering longer than he should. Oh, McAllister's ranch is on the way to our homestead. If you wouldn't mind the company, Mr. Jorgensen, I would appreciate the escort. Those boys have been known to continue their teasing outside of town. Every instinct told Levi to decline. Getting involved with townsfolk, even in this small way, was asking for complications he didn't need. But the thought of those men following her, continuing their cruel taunts, made his decision for him. It would be no trouble, Miss Vandermeer. He offered to take her packages, securing them to his saddlebags before helping her onto his horse. He would walk alongside, leading the animal by the reins. As they left town, Kathryn sitting somewhat self-consciously on his horse, Levi felt the curious eyes of townspeople following them. He kept his gaze fixed ahead, determined to complete this unexpected task and continue on his solitary way. One good deed didn't mean he was putting down roots or opening himself to new connections. You're new to these parts, Kathryn observed, breaking the silence that had settled between them as the town receded behind them. Just hired on for the season, Levi replied, not elaborating. Most men who come through here have stories they're running from or dreams they're chasing. Which is it for you, Mr. Jorgensen? There was no judgment in her tone, only a gentle curiosity. Levi glanced up at her, surprised by her directness. Most frontier women he'd encountered were more reserved, especially with strangers. Neither, I suppose, just looking to earn enough to buy my own place someday. A home of your own is a fine dream, she said, smiling. Though a solitary one. Solitary suits me fine. His tone indicated the subject was closed, but Kathryn Vandermeer wasn't easily deterred. The West can be a lonely place without companions. Even the most independent spirits need connection sometimes. Levi didn't answer, but her words found a crack in his armor, slipping through to stir something he'd long buried. He quickened his pace slightly, as if he could outrun the uncomfortable feeling. They crested a small hill, and Kathryn pointed to a modest homestead nestled in a small valley ahead. That's our place. Father and I have lived there since Mother passed 5 years ago. The property was well maintained, with a small but thriving garden plot and several fruit trees surrounding a 2-story house. A smaller building that must serve as the workshop for her father's medicinal preparations stood off to one side. It was the kind of place that spoke of hard work and care, the kind of place Levi had once called home. As they approached, a middle-aged man with graying hair emerged from the workshop, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. When he recognized his daughter, he waved, then looked curiously at Levi. That's Father, Kathryn said. He'll insist you stay for supper to thank you for the escort. That's not necessary, Levi replied quickly. I should get on to McAllister's before nightfall. McAllister's is only another hour's ride, and the days are long this time of year, she countered. Besides, Father makes a venison stew that's worth the delay. Before Levi could protest further, they reached the yard, and Kathryn's father approached with a welcoming smile. Kathryn, I was beginning to worry, and who might this gentleman be? Father, this is Mr. Levi Jorgensen. He's on his way to work at McAllister's and kindly offered to escort me home after some trouble with the Peterson boys in town. Mr. Vandermeer's expression darkened momentarily. Those young men need a stern talking to. I appreciate you looking out for my daughter, Mr. Jorgensen. You must stay for supper at the very least. Trapped by frontier hospitality and Kathryn's knowing smile, Levi found himself accepting the invitation. As he helped Kathryn down from his horse, his hands at her waist, he was acutely aware of her warmth and the subtle floral scent of her hair. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met and something passed between them, a spark of connection that Levi immediately tried to dismiss. One meal, he told himself, one meal and then back to the solitary path he had chosen. The West was no place for entanglements, especially not for a man who had already lost everything once before. But as he followed the Vandermeers into their home, the unexpected warmth of welcome seeped into the cold places inside him, like spring thaw after a hard winter, bringing with it both promise and danger. During supper, Levi learned that Harold Vandermeer was not only the town's apothecary, but also something of a self-taught doctor, one of the few in the territory willing to treat both settlers and Native Americans alike. Kathryn had apprenticed with him since her mother's death, learning the healing arts with a natural aptitude that made her father proud. "Kathryn has a gift," Harold said, passing Levi a basket of fresh bread. "Her mother was Cherokee and passed down knowledge of plant medicine that complements my more formal training. Between us, we managed to keep most of Willow Creek and the surrounding homesteads in good health." Levi noticed how Kathryn's cheeks colored at her father's praise. "Father exaggerates, I merely assist." "Nonsense," Harold countered. "She saved the Wilson baby last winter when I was laid up with influenza, rode out in a blizzard when no one else would attempt it." Levi found himself reassessing the woman across the table. Behind the quiet dignity he'd observed in town, there was clearly a core of steel and determination. "That must have been dangerous," he said. "Less dangerous than doing nothing," Kathryn replied simply, her eyes meeting his. The conversation drifted to other topics: the upcoming harvest, the news from back east, the cattle prices that would determine whether McAllister's drive would be profitable. Throughout the meal, Levi found himself drawn into the easy warmth of their home despite his best intentions to remain detached. As twilight approached, he knew he should continue to McAllister's, but Harold insisted it was too late. "The ranch hands will be settled for the night by now. Better to get a fresh start in the morning. We have a spare room that's yours if you'll accept it." Again, Levi found himself accepting hospitality he hadn't sought, spending the night in a home filled with reminders of what he'd lost, and perhaps what he'd been denying himself. From his room, he could hear Kathryn moving about downstairs, the soft humming of a melody he didn't recognize floating up through the floorboards, settling around him like a comfort he hadn't known he was missing. In the morning, Levi rose early, determined to be on his way before he could be drawn further into the Vandermeers' lives. But when he came downstairs, Kathryn was already in the kitchen, her hair tied back with a blue ribbon, preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Mr. Jorgensen," she greeted him with a smile. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in some time," he admitted, then wondered why he had done so. "I should be on my way soon. McAllister will be expecting me." "Of course, but not before breakfast." She gestured to the table where she'd already set a place for him. As he ate the simple but satisfying meal of eggs, bacon, and biscuits, Levi found himself studying Kathryn as she moved about the kitchen. There was a graceful efficiency to her movements, despite the cruel words those men had used against her. Her figure was fuller than the wasp-waisted ideal that seemed to be in fashion, but it suited her, strong and capable, like the land itself. "The food is excellent," he said when she joined him at the table. "Thank you." "You're welcome. It's nice to cook for someone besides father. He eats anything I put in front of him, which isn't very helpful for improving my skills." Her smile was warm, reaching all the way to her amber eyes. "Your father mentioned your mother was Cherokee." Kathryn nodded. She came to these parts with her family after they were forced from their lands in the east. "My father was setting up his practice here and treated her brother after a hunting accident. They fell in love despite everyone's disapproval." There was pride in her voice, but also a hint of old pain. "After they married, many in town refused to do business with my father, but he never regretted his choice." "That couldn't have been easy for any of you," Levi said, thinking of the cruelty he'd witnessed in town. "The frontier forges people in different ways, Mr. Jorgensen. It can make them hard and cruel, or it can reveal unexpected strength and kindness." She studied him for a moment. "Which has it done to you, I wonder?" Before Levi could formulate a response, Harold joined them and the conversation shifted to safer topics. Soon after, Levi thanked them for their hospitality and prepared to leave, relieved to be returning to the straightforward world of cattle and hard work, where emotions could be kept firmly in check. As he mounted his horse, Kathryn approached with a small package. "Some provisions for your ride and a salve for rope burns. Ranch work is hard on the hands." Levi accepted the package, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. "That's very kind of you. Perhaps we'll see you in town sometime," she said, her expression hopeful. "Father and I come in most Sundays for church and supplies." "Perhaps," he replied noncommittally, though something inside him responded to the invitation in her eyes. With a tip of his hat, he turned his horse toward McAllister's ranch, trying to ignore the strange reluctance he felt to leave the Vandermeer homestead behind. The work at McAllister's was exactly what Levi needed: physical, demanding, and leaving little time for reflection. Days blurred into a rhythm of pre-dawn rising, cattle herding, fence mending, and collapsing into exhausted sleep in the bunkhouse. The other hands were a rough but decent lot, most keeping to themselves as much as he did. But as the first Sunday approached, Levi found himself thinking of Kathryn more than he cared to admit. Her quiet strength, her gentle defiance of those who mocked her, the warmth of her home, these thoughts crept into his mind during quiet moments, unwelcome reminders of what he'd sworn to avoid. "Heading into town tomorrow?" asked Sam, an older cowhand, as they finished the evening chores on Saturday. "Not planning on it," Levi replied, focusing on unsaddling his horse. "Might do you good." "Been working hard enough for 3 men since you got here." Sam studied him with weathered eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. "Running from something or someone, I reckon." Levi stiffened. "Just doing the job I was hired for." Sam chuckled, undeterred. Sure, but even the most dedicated cowpoke needs a day off now and then. Town's got a decent saloon if that's your preference, or church if you're the God-fearing type." The mention of church brought unbidden images of Kathryn in her Sunday best, perhaps with that same blue ribbon in her hair. Levi pushed the thought away. "I'll consider it." But Sunday morning found him riding toward Willow Creek, telling himself he was only going for supplies and perhaps a proper meal at the hotel restaurant. The church service would be finishing as he arrived, and if he happened to see the Vandermeers, it would be mere coincidence in a town that small. The streets were busier than during his previous visit, with families in their Sunday clothes gathering outside the white-steepled church as the service concluded. Levi tied his horse at the hitching post outside the general store, intending to complete his errands quickly. But as the congregation dispersed, he caught sight of Kathryn and her father among them. She wore a dress of deep green that complemented her complexion and brought out the golden flecks in her amber eyes. Her hair was indeed tied back with the blue ribbon he remembered, and she was smiling at something her father had said. Then her gaze drifted across the street and found him. The smile that bloomed on her face was like sunrise over the plains, unexpected and breathtaking. She said something to her father, who looked over and nodded in recognition, before she made her way across the dusty street toward Levi. "Mr. Jorgensen," she greeted him, slightly breathless. "What a pleasant surprise." "Miss Vandermeer," he tipped his hat, suddenly conscious of his work clothes and the trail dust that clung to them. "Just in town for supplies." "Of course. And how are you finding work at McAllister's?" "It's good, honest work." He shifted, uncomfortable with small talk yet unwilling to end the conversation. "Your father is well?" "Very well, thank you." She glanced back at Harold, who was engaged in conversation with the minister. "We usually take dinner at the hotel after services. Would you care to join us?" Again, Levi found himself at a crossroads, the sensible path of polite refusal versus the dangerous one of acceptance. And again, something in Kathryn's open expression made the decision for him. "I'd be honored," he said, surprising himself. As they walked together toward the hotel, Levi was acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. Clearly, Kathryn Vandermeer walking with a ranch hand was worthy of notice. He heard whispers behind raised hands, and when they passed the saloon, he recognized one of the men who had taunted Kathryn during his last visit. "Well, look at that," the man called out loudly enough to be heard. "Too Heavy found herself a cowboy." Levi felt Kathryn stiffen beside him but maintain her pace, chin held high. The jeering continued, joined by another voice. "Better watch that horse of yours, Cowboy, liable to collapse under the strain." Something hot and dangerous unfurled in Levi's chest. He stopped abruptly, turning toward the saloon porch where the men lounged with their whiskey. Kathryn placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Please don't," she said quietly. "They're not worth the trouble you'd find." "They have no right to speak to you that way," Levi replied, his voice tight with anger. "No, they don't, but confronting them will only give them the audience they crave." Her eyes met his, steady and clear. "I've learned to choose my battles carefully in this town." The wisdom in her words penetrated his anger. With a nod, he continued walking with her, though the tension remained in his shoulders. How do you bear it? He asked after they had gone some distance. By remembering that their words say more about them than about me, she smiled slightly, and by knowing my own worth even when others fail to see it. Her quiet dignity humbled him. Here was someone who faced cruelty regularly yet refused to let it embitter her. It was a kind of strength Levi hadn't considered before, not the harsh self-reliance he'd cultivated, but something more resilient and ultimately more powerful. At the hotel restaurant they were joined by Harold, and the meal passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing more easily than Levi expected. He found himself sharing stories of his travels that he hadn't spoken of in years, drawn out by Kathryn's genuine interest and thoughtful questions. As the afternoon waned and Levi knew he should return to the ranch, Harold excused himself to check on a patient, leaving Levi and Kathryn alone at the table. "Will you be in town again next Sunday?" she asked, a hint of hope in her voice. Levi hesitated. The sensible answer was no. He wasn't looking for entanglements, wasn't planning to stay in the area once the season's work was done, but looking at Kathryn, he couldn't bring himself to close the door she was carefully opening. "I might be," he said. "McAllister gives us Sundays off if there's no emergency with the cattle." "Then perhaps we'll see you," she smiled, and that fluttering sensation returned to his chest. "Father and I are usually here after services." "I'll remember that." Levi stood, reluctant to leave yet knowing he must. "Thank you for the company, Miss Vandermeer." "Kathryn, please." After sharing 2 meals, I think we can dispense with formalities. "Kathryn," he repeated, the name feeling right on his tongue. "Thank you." As he rode back to the ranch, Levi found himself in unfamiliar territory, both dreading and anticipating the next Sunday with equal measure. The walls he'd built around his heart had developed a crack, and try as he might, he couldn't seem to repair it. The week crawled by with excruciating slowness. Each day of physical labor that should have left Levi too exhausted for thought instead seemed to leave his mind more active, filled with memories of amber eyes and a smile that seemed to see past his defenses. When Sunday finally arrived, Levi found himself taking unusual care with his appearance, wearing his one good shirt and spending extra time shaving. He ignored the knowing looks from the other hands as he rode out, earlier than necessary to reach town by the time church services ended. This time he waited openly near the church, tipping his hat to townspeople who passed by, most regarding him with curious glances. When Kathryn emerged with her father, her face lit up at the sight of him, and something inside Levi shifted, a piece of ice melting away from the frozen core he'd maintained for so long. Their Sunday dinners became a regular occurrence over the following weeks. Each time, Levi learned more about Kathryn, her dreams of expanding her father's practice to help more people, her love of books, her quiet determination to carve out a meaningful life despite the limitations others tried to place on her. And each time he found himself sharing more of himself than he had with anyone since his parents' deaths. One Sunday in late summer, as they walked together after dinner, Harold having once again found a reason to leave them alone, Kathryn asked the question Levi had been dreading. "The cattle drive to Kansas City begins soon, doesn't it?" "Next week," he confirmed, his voice carefully neutral. "We'll be gone about a month if the weather holds." "And after that?" Her question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Levi stopped walking, turning to face her. They stood in the shade of a cottonwood tree at the edge of town, far enough from prying eyes to speak honestly. "I hadn't planned beyond the season," he admitted. "McAllister will lay off most hands once the drive is done." "You could stay," Kathryn said softly. "Willow Creek could use a man with your skills. Father has been saying we need help with the heavier work around our place." The offer dangled before him like a lifeline, tempting in its simplicity. "Stay, build something here, allow these fragile feelings to develop into whatever they might become. I don't know if that's wise," he said, though even to his own ears the words lacked conviction. "I'm not the settling type, Kathryn." "Aren't you?" Her amber eyes studied him intently. "Or are you just afraid to try again after whatever loss drove you to this wandering life?" Her insight struck too close to home, making him step back instinctively. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" She moved closer, undeterred by his retreat. "I see the way you look at families, Levi, like you're remembering something precious that was taken from you. I see how carefully you hold yourself apart, how you flinch when children run too close, as if their happiness might be contagious or their loss too painful to risk. "Stop," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just stop." But Kathryn Vandermeer was not a woman easily silenced. She took his hand, her touch warm and steady. "Whatever you lost, staying alone won't bring it back. And whatever you're running from will follow you wherever you go until you face it." The truth of her words broke something open inside him. "My family," he said finally, the words torn from somewhere deep and wounded. "Fire took our homestead 2 years ago. My parents were inside. I was away, delivering horses to a neighboring ranch. By the time I returned, there was nothing left to save." "Oh, Levi," her eyes filled with compassion, not pity. "I am so sorry." "I should have been there," he continued, the words flowing now like blood from a long festering wound. "I might have been able to get them out, or at least I would have died with them instead of being left alone." "And then where would I be?" she asked gently. "Standing here with a ghost instead of a man who's becoming very important to me." Her words caught him off guard. "Important." "Yes, important," she squeezed his hand. "Did you think these Sundays were merely friendly conversation for me, that I look forward to them all week because I enjoy the hotel's cooking?" A flutter of hope rose in Levi's chest, dangerous and insistent. "Kathryn, I have nothing to offer you. No land, no home, just the clothes on my back and whatever I've saved from my wages." "I'm not asking for land or money, Levi. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that your life isn't meant to be spent alone, that perhaps what happened to your family wasn't the end of your story, but the beginning of a different one." Her words reached into the darkest corners of his grief, offering not an erasure of pain, but the possibility of building something new alongside it. Still, fear kept him tethered to caution. "I need to think," he said finally. "The drive will give me time to consider everything." Disappointment flickered across Kathryn's face, but she nodded. "Of course." "A month is not so long." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you write to me while you're gone? Letters might help with your thinking." The request seemed small enough, a reasonable compromise. "I will," he promised, not knowing then how those letters would come to be a lifeline during the difficult journey ahead. The cattle drive began with fair weather and high hopes. McAllister's herd was healthy, and the team of cowboys experienced enough to handle the challenges of moving over 2,000 cattle across hundreds of miles to the railhead at Kansas City. Levi, assigned to ride flank, kept the strays in line while his mind wandered repeatedly to Willow Creek and the woman he'd left behind. At night, by campfire light, he wrote to Kathryn as promised. The first letters were cautious, filled with descriptions of the journey and little of his inner thoughts. But as the days passed and the solitude of the trail wrapped around him, his words became more personal, more honest. He wrote of the stars above the prairie, how they reminded him of the freckles across her nose. He described the rolling landscape and how its gentle curves brought to mind her smile. Gradually, he found himself confessing fears and hopes he'd never spoken aloud, trusting them to paper and to her. Her replies, collected whenever they passed near a town with a post office, became treasures he carried in his saddlebags. Kathryn wrote of her daily life in Willow Creek, of patients she had treated, of books she was reading. But she also wrote of her feelings for him, unashamed and direct in a way that both terrified and exhilarated him. "I find myself looking for you everywhere," one letter read, "in the face of every rider who passes through town, in the distance when I walk to the edge of our property. Father teases me for my distraction, but he understands. He says true connection is rare enough in this world that one should nurture it when found. I believe he's right, Levi. Whatever comes of these feelings between us, I cannot regret them, for they have awakened something in me I didn't know was sleeping." Halfway through the drive, disaster struck. A sudden thunderstorm spooked the herd, triggering a stampede that left 2 cowboys injured and scattered cattle across miles of prairie. For days, they worked to round up the strays, pushing themselves and their horses to the limit. During the chaos, Levi's horse stepped in a prairie dog hole, throwing him hard to the ground. The pain in his ribs told him at least one was broken, but with men still missing and cattle unaccounted for, he couldn't afford to rest. He bound his chest tightly and continued the search, each breath a sharp reminder of his vulnerability. That night, feverish and in pain, he wrote to Kathryn by faltering firelight, his words more raw than any he'd sent before. I thought I knew what it meant to be alone, but I was wrong, he wrote. True loneliness isn't the absence of others, it's the absence of connection, of being known. Out here, surrounded by men I've worked alongside for months, I feel more alone than ever because none of them know me as you do. None of them see past what I show the world to what lies beneath. You asked me once if I could stay in Willow Creek. Tonight, with the taste of dust in my mouth and pain in every breath, I find myself wondering if I could bear to leave. It was the closest he'd come to admitting what was growing in his heart, what he'd been fighting since that first Sunday dinner. When they finally reached Kansas City, weary but successful despite the setbacks, Levi posted one final letter before they began the journey home. We turn back tomorrow. 3 weeks have passed since I saw your face, and I find I cannot remember the precise shade of your eyes or the exact curve of your smile. This troubles me more than it should. I have lived my life keeping memories at bay, but now I find I want to hold on to every detail of you. What does this mean, Kathryn? I think perhaps you know better than I do. The return journey to Willow Creek seemed endless. Without the cattle to drive, they made better time, but still, Levi chafed at the delay. His ribs had begun to heal, though they still ached with each movement, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the cost of carelessness. As they approached familiar territory, an unexpected anxiety gripped him. What if Kathryn had changed her mind in his absence? What if his letters had revealed too much or not enough? What if the connection he'd felt through their correspondence proved to be an illusion when faced with reality? The day they rode into McAllister's ranch, tired and trail-worn, Levi collected his pay and, despite his exhaustion, saddled a fresh horse. The foreman raised an eyebrow but asked no questions as Levi rode out again, heading not toward town but directly to the Vandermeer homestead. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when he arrived, casting long shadows across the yard. Smoke curled from the chimney and he could see movement through the windows. For a moment he sat on his horse, gathering courage for what he was about to do. Before he could dismount, the door opened and Kathryn appeared on the porch. She wore a simple dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and the sight of her after so long apart made his heart stutter in his chest. She stared at him for a long moment, as if ensuring he was real, then flew down the steps toward him. Levi swung down from the saddle, wincing slightly at the twinge in his ribs, and then she was there, standing before him, her eyes, amber, yes, but with flecks of gold he'd forgotten, searching his face. "You came straight here," she said, her voice catching. "Not to town, not to clean up first." "I couldn't wait," he admitted, suddenly conscious of the trail dust that covered him, the stubble on his jaw, the worn state of his clothes. "I needed to see you." A smile bloomed on her face, as radiant as he remembered. "I needed to see you too." She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve as if reassuring herself of his solidity. "Your letters, Levi, they meant everything to me." "As yours did to me." He took her hand, marveling at its warmth. "Kathryn, I've been thinking about what you said before I left, about staying." Hope flared in her eyes, but she contained it, waiting for him to continue. "I'm not the same man who rode out a month ago," he said slowly, finding his way through feelings he was only beginning to understand. "The things I wrote to you, I've never spoken so openly to anyone, never allowed myself to feel." "Feel what?" she prompted gently when he faltered. Levi took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the pain in his ribs. "Hope." "Connection," he paused, gathering courage for the final admission. "Love." The word hung between them, impossible to take back. Kathryn's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "Yes," he continued, committed now to the truth. "I fought against it, told myself the frontier was no place for such feelings, that I didn't deserve them after failing my family. But your letters, your understanding, they found their way past all my defenses." "Oh, Levi," tears gathered in her eyes. "I've loved you since that day you stood up for me in town. Not for the gesture itself, though it was kind, but for the man I glimpsed behind it, honorable, gentle despite the hardness life had forced upon you. I'm still that man, Kathryn. Still carrying those scars, that guilt. I don't know if I can ever fully set it aside." "I'm not asking you to," she said, stepping closer. "Our pasts make us who we are. I only ask that you make room in your heart for a future as well, one that includes me." Before Levi could respond, the sound of approaching hooves drew their attention. A group of riders was coming up the road toward the homestead, 5 men, and with a sinking feeling, Levi recognized the lead rider as the ringleader from town who had taunted Kathryn. Peterson, Kathryn murmured, her expression darkening, and his friends. Levi moved protectively closer to her as the riders approached, his hand instinctively checking the position of his pistol. "Well, look what we have here," Peterson called out as they drew near. "The cowboy's back from the drive, and the first place he comes is straight to Too Heavy." He laughed, encouraging his companions to join in. "Must be love, boys. Or maybe just desperation." "Move along, Peterson," Levi said, his voice hard. "You're not welcome here." "It's a public road," Peterson replied with a smirk. "We're just passing by, saw a touching reunion in progress." His gaze shifted to Kathryn, mockingly appraising. "What do you see in her anyway, cowboy? Can't be her dance partner skills. Maybe she just cooks well enough to maintain that figure." Anger flared in Levi, hot and dangerous. "I won't warn you again. Show some respect or ride on." Peterson's face hardened. "Or what? You planning to take on all 5 of us broken up as you are? Yeah, we heard about your accident on the drive." "Word travels." Levi tensed, aware of the odds against him but unwilling to let the insults continue. Before he could respond, Kathryn stepped forward, her chin lifted in that dignified way he'd first admired. "Mr. Peterson, my father is currently treating your mother's rheumatism with medicine I prepared," she said, her voice steady. "Would you like me to inform her of how you speak to and about women when you think no one of consequence is listening?" Peterson's face reddened. "You leave my mother out of this." "Gladly, if you'll extend the same courtesy to me and my guest." She held his gaze, unflinching. For a tense moment, it seemed the confrontation might escalate further. Then Peterson spat into the dirt. "Come on, boys, nothing worth our time here." With a final glare, he wheeled his horse around and the group rode off toward town. When they were out of sight, Levi turned to Kathryn with newfound admiration. "That was impressive." She smiled, though the tension hadn't fully left her shoulders. "Sometimes words are more effective than fists. Though I appreciate your willingness to defend my honor." "I would do far more than that for you, Kathryn," Levi said softly, the confrontation having stripped away any remaining hesitation. "If you'll have me, I want to stay. Not just in Willow Creek, but here, with you, building something together." Joy bloomed across her face, transforming it. "Are you sure? What about your dream of your own spread?" "Dreams change," he said simply. "Or rather, they grow to include what matters most." He took her hands in his. "I can't offer much yet, but I'm strong, I work hard, and I promise to be a good partner to you in whatever life brings." "That's all I've ever wanted," she whispered. "Someone who sees me as I am and values what he sees." Levi's heart swelled with emotion he'd denied for too long. With gentle hands, he cupped her face, leaning forward until their foreheads touched. "I see you, Kathryn Vandermeer. All of you, and what I see is beautiful beyond words." In that moment, a voice called from the house. "Kathryn, is someone there?" Harold Vandermeer appeared on the porch, squinting into the fading light. "It's Levi, father," Kathryn called back, her voice bright with happiness. "He's come back to us." "Well, don't keep him standing in the yard. Bring him inside before the sun sets completely." Harold waved them toward the house, smiling broadly. Hand in hand, they walked toward the porch, toward the warmth and light of the home that Levi now dared to hope might become his own. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise, like the frontier itself, challenging, sometimes harsh, but offering rewards beyond measure to those brave enough to stake their claim. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning gold across the hills, Levi stood with Kathryn before the minister in Willow Creek's small church. Her hand was warm in his as they spoke their vows, her amber eyes steady with love and certainty. She wore a dress of deep blue that complemented her rich brown hair and fuller figure, a dress she had sewn herself with pride. The church was full, the town having gradually warmed to the match once they saw Levi's dedication to both Kathryn and her father's practice. Even Peterson and his friends had quieted their taunts, especially after Levi had taken a job helping the blacksmith, his strength and skill earning respect even from former detractors. As Levi leaned in to seal their vows with a kiss, he heard a whisper from somewhere in the congregation, "Too heavy," followed by a snicker quickly hushed. But rather than anger, Levi felt only a surge of protective love. He cupped Kathryn's face in his hands with deliberate tenderness and kissed her with a sweetness that silenced every whisper, a kiss that spoke of reverence and promise and a future built on mutual respect. When they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Levi's arm firmly around Kathryn's waist, he saw only support in the faces before them, Harold beaming with fatherly pride, Sam from the McAllister ranch nodding approval, the blacksmith and his wife wiping away tears. The journey from that first meeting outside the general store to this moment had changed them both. Kathryn stood taller, more confident in herself and her place in the world. And Levi had finally laid down the burden of guilt he'd carried for so long, making room in his heart for the love that had found him when he least expected it. That evening, as they danced at their small reception in the town hall, Levi held his bride close, marveling at how perfectly they fit together despite all the forces that might have kept them apart. "What are you thinking?" Kathryn asked, smiling up at him. "That I'm the luckiest man in the territory," he replied honestly, "and that sometimes the thing you think you're running from is actually what you've been searching for all along." "And what was that for you?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with happiness. "Home," he said simply, "not a place but a feeling, belonging, being known and loved anyway." He squeezed her hand. "I found it all in you." As they continued to dance, oblivious to the watching eyes of Willow Creek's residents, the truth was clear to anyone who cared to see it. What they had found in each other was stronger than any cruel words or frontier hardship. It was a love built on seeing beyond surfaces to the heart beneath, a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges the West might bring. And if anyone still whispered "too heavy" when Kathryn passed by, Levi's protective presence and devoted gaze told the whole story, that her weight in his life was exactly what he needed to stay grounded in a world that had once seemed determined to blow him away like tumbleweed across the plains. In her he had found his anchor, his home, and a love worth fighting for, worth living for in the untamed heart of the American frontier.